Analyzing a primary source. Research using primary source material is different than research using secondary source material. Primary sources are the building blocks of historical research. They are the evidence that you will use to answer your research question. When you are researching using primary source material, it is you that is interpreting and analyzing the information you can find from that source. You will then use that to answer your research question. When working with primary source materials, the best way to start is to ask yourself a simple question. What is the source? We're going to work through a series of photographs from the Oshawa Museum collection that will help us better understand an event in Oshawa's history. So our source are photographs. So we click on this first photograph, we ask ourselves another simple question. What is the event? In this case, the event is a plane crash. We can look at this photo to better understand more about this event. So we know that there was a plane crash in the history of Oshawa. What clues in this photograph will help us understand where this event occurred? Well, look at the buildings. The buildings will help inform where this event occurred. They're tall, 3-story buildings. So, clearly, the event occurred in downtown. So at some point in Oshawa's history, a plane crashed in downtown Oshawa. As we click on the second picture, we start to pull more information. What time period do we think this event occurred in? Well, we look to the plane to give us an idea of when this occurred. Clearly, this is not a modern plane. So we know at some point in early aviation history, a plane crashed in downtown Oshawa. What other clues could we use in these photographs to understand what time period this was? Well, you could look to the clothing that the people are wearing. You could look to the businesses that are noted underneath the plane. You can look to the buildings to understand what businesses were in operation during the time that this plane crashed. When we move to the third photograph, we can really narrow down the time period. Look at the clothing that the men are wearing. What does their clothing tell us? Well, they're wearing uniforms. What sort of uniforms are they wearing? They're wearing soldier uniforms. So, we know that soldiers were at a plane crash in downtown Oshawa at some point in the early 1900s. How could we further narrow this down? Well, look more closely at their uniforms, and that will tell us a time period. If you notice the uniforms that the soldiers are wearing, they're uniforms from the First World War. So that tells us that at some point between 1914 and 1918, a plane crashed in downtown Oshawa. What else could we learn about Oshawa's history from these photographs beyond the plane crash between 1914 and 1918? Well, we can use these photographs to learn more about the businesses that were located in downtown Oshawa. We can use the photographs to understand how the downtown area has changed from this time period to today. What other questions might you have about an event like this? Where else would we find information? So we know from the photographs at some point between 1914 and 1918, a plane crashed in downtown Oshawa. Where would we turn if we wanted to learn more about this event? Well, newspaper accounts. We have a newspaper account of the plane crash. So we know that in April of 1918, this plane crashed in downtown Oshawa. The newspaper report actually gives us other areas of research where we can look. We know that the airplane came from the Leaside Training Camp, which was located in today Toronto. We can learn more about the Leaside Training Camp. We can learn more about the businesses that were impacted. We could learn more about a Mrs. Guy who was hit on the head by a falling stone from the top of the building when the plane crashed. And the newspaper also helps us to better understand how that plane crashed. Apparently, the pilot was putting on quite a show for the residents of Oshawa until he got tangled up in the wires and dangled from the top of the building.